So in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there was a scene where the main character, Richard Dreyfuss, had an encounter. Something was happening to him and he didn't know what. And he was possessed by this image, just overcome by this image. And he would see it in his mashed potatoes and the dirt. And there's one particular scene where he was hauling wheelbarrows full of dirt into his living room, making this image in his living room out of dirt and debris and mud. And he didn't know why, and he didn't know what for. He was just following an impulse. And something like that started to happen to me. And it began with spicy food and peppers and hot food, like I was stoking a fire in my belly. And then I started going to the woods to make fire and build altars. This was shortly after a really close friend of mine had passed away. I went into the woods on a full moon and made a fire and laid out my altar of antlers and bone and feathers and stone, just a crude altar, and my crucifix from my first Holy Communion when I was 8 years old, and my grandmother's crucifix. Watched the sun go down and the moon come up. It was a full moon, and it was cold. It was so cold I couldn't get warm. It was a bone-deep cold, and I was up and I was moving around the fire and I was stomping my feet and I was just growling and making noises when I realized that I was grieving. And there's no place to put grief. It has to come out, and it was coming out in this primal way. And I was grieving for the loss of my friend. I was grieving for something deeper within myself, a loss of connection. And I remember shouting, roaring, yelling at the moon and into the night sky and into the fire. I was so cold, I was stomping around, and I wanted to tear off my clothes and stand barefoot and naked on the frozen ground and step into the fire, to stand in the fire that I had made. And I was just overcome. What came out of my mouth was, I want to live. I want to live. I want to live fully. And I want to know who I am. And I was grateful. I felt overwhelming gratitude for my life. And I just collapsed to the ground in tears. And that was a turning point for me. That's when everything shifted. In the days that followed, for that month that followed, I started making a stone circle. Rock by rock, I laid out this circle. It was perfectly round. And then I built the fire pit. And I was moved by an impulse, something I was just moved to do this. And didn't know what, didn't know why, but I did it. Little did I know then that years later I would begin to invite people to the fire to sit with me and to engage in deep conversation about what matters and what matters in our lives and what's most meaningful to us. And at the next full moon, I went out again, pulled to the woods, drawn out. And again, I laid out my altar and I built a fire and I waited. I had my journal open and I waited. And again, it was cold and I had questions. Questions were coming to me, like, why am I here? What is my life for? How can I live true to myself? I really wanted to know. And I was in tears. And then my mind went very quiet and everything was still. And I was listening. I was straining to hear something and just being very quiet and still in the moment. And I heard a voice that was so faint. And it said, "Why are you here?" And again, I was in tears. I said, "I don't know. Please tell me. I don't know why I'm here." And the voice continued. It said, "We called you to the fire for a change because someone has to listen. And that someone is you. And everything is in communication with me, with the Creator. And everything has a purpose. And you're here to discover yours. Nothing is hidden. Everything, the truth is written everywhere for you to find. And I sat with that, just taking it in, and then it said, open your heart. We are coming through you. And I understood that to say, get out of the way, because something wanted to come through me that was bigger than me, that was truer than I could ever know. So we went deep into the night. I sat there listening and journaling, writing what was coming to me, and a conversation unfolded that has stayed with me. It's a conversation that has not ended after all these years. And there was a time when I was afraid that that voice would leave me, that one day I would wake up and it would be gone. And I wouldn't have the urge to come to the fire. I wouldn't feel the impulse to journal and listen. And what I discovered was, not only did it not go away, it got stronger, that I cultivated a relationship with it, like I would with a human being, with another human being. I gave it attention, I spent time listening, and I came to know that voice and recognize it as my voice. It was my voice coming through me, my authentic voice. And I knew that voice the way a child knows the sound of his mother's voice in a crowded room. And I became more and more familiar and more deeply and intimately connected to that voice, and realized that that voice was always with me. It never went away. And it was my job to cultivate a relationship with it. And I recognize that that's true for all of us, because I'm no different than you or anyone else. We all have that voice within us, our inner voice that's waiting patiently for us to listen for what it has to offer us. And really that's the message for me, the message for you, to listen for your voice, because it belongs to you. So when I think back to the man I was so many years ago, building the circle, making fire, not knowing then for what, and yet asking for what? Why me? Why this? I understand now. And what it was for me it was this, as a way of connecting, a way of grounding. For you it's going to be something different, but it's to know what your way is, to know what it is that lives in your heart, and to express it, and to listen for what your heart has for you, what it has to say. How you can begin to listen for that voice as you make time, you carve out time for yourself to be quiet and to listen for what is yours to hear, because no one can do that for us. And that voice, that presence, it never goes away. It's always with us. The only question is, are we willing to be quiet enough to listen? I hope this is helpful. Stay close to the fire, and I'll see you next time. Adios.